what's it called? This dream, this vision of America as a growing nation destined by God.
Manifest
destiny. Yeah, very good. Manifest destiny. Good, Addie. Yeah, the idea is that, now again, James K. Polk didn't run on the term manifest destiny. This was actually coined after he got elected. In 1845. That guy, John O'Sullivan. But it's the idea that who has ordained us to cover from sea to shining sea? God has. This is God's vision for America, that we dominate the hemisphere. And by the way, they did believe that that meant not just Atlantic to Pacific, but also potentially from Canada to Chile. Understand? The whole Western Hemisphere. Lots of images of this. They do frequently appear on AP and Pan. Yesterday we did the amazing election of 1844. James K. Polk and all his awesomeness. So I want to jump. Actually, I think I'll jump past the Mexican War. I know that's weird to go completely out of order. And do. Oh, I already did Mexico. Okay, sorry. Oregon. I just want to remind you the Oregon issue will be settled by President Polk as well here. So also in 1842. So he had said he got elected on some people in his campaign, Democrats, that said 54, 40, or fight. So what's that mean?
All or nothing.
Well, what is 54, 40? I mean, what is that? What do those numbers represent?
Latitude.
All right, they're latitude, right? Yeah, line of latitude. So 54 degrees north, 40 minutes. That's 54, 40. 54 degrees, and that's where you see this Fort Simpson here. You see it? So the expansionists were arguing, we want all of Oregon. When Polk takes office, he immediately recognizes that's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Plus, is it really worth it? Is this little bit of this part here we're fighting Britain over? Polk decides no. Plus, Polk's from Tennessee, not as concerned about Oregon, a lot more interested in California and Mexico, right? Texas. So they end up not firing a shot, and rather than 54, 40 or fight, they get 49 degrees. So this is the Oregon Treaty of 1846. You should know that. This is the second treaty with Britain over Oregon. And this time, rather than jointly share it, they split the difference. And so the 49th degree, you go all the way back to here, remember the Webster-Ashburton Treaty under John Tyler? This will be extended all the way out here, all right, to where Vancouver is. Okay, so, and that's why if you look at that northern boundary of the United States, it looks so artificial in a way. Like somebody just drew a straight line. Well, what is that line? No, that's not 5440. No, 49. That's 49 from the 95th meridian, which is right here, right by the Lake of the Woods. From the 95th meridian all the way over here to, was it Puget Sound? I think it was Bay. This isn't Vancouver, but Vancouver Bay. Anyway, from here to here is all one single line. And because we're friendly with the Mounties, right, and we're friendly with Canada, that is the world's longest unfortified border, unsecured border. Basically, if you're in Montana and you walk to Canada's border, there may be like a single strand of chain, like rope chain, and you can be like, and now you're in Canada. Like that's the extent of the Canadian border. It's improved some, potentially improved around like areas where there's cities, although there's none hardly at all in Montana, but where there's like border crossing roads. But a lot of that's just plains. So speaking of which, the Sioux Native Americans aren't going to like ride around here and then stop here. Like they're going to continue up into what is Manitoba. That's the Manitoba and Alberta are these plains, prairie provinces, the prairie provinces in Canada. Okay, so everybody got that. So by 1846, Polk has gotten, well, he got Texas right away. He's got the Oregon boundary settled. He's got the Walker Tariff done. He's got the Independent Treasury Act passed. All that's missing is where? What was his only other promise? California. Now, he got Texas. He got Texas already. Remember, Tyler gets that done before he even takes office. All right, so all that's left is California. And as much as Polk's an expansionist, I don't consider Polk a warmonger. Some of his critics call him that. You understand what a warmonger is? Like somebody who goes out to start war. So Polk says, you know, what's been the traditional method of gaining territory? Land purchase, right on, buying. You know, we buy Louisiana, you know, we buy Florida. So let's buy Mexico, at least a chunk of it. Let's buy California. So he sends this fellow, John Slidell. So this is called the Slidell Mission. You should know that, the Slidell Mission. I'm looking here at, well, you know what? Actually, I might want to answer this question first, since this is the order here. This is question number 29, why we weren't getting along with Mexico prior to this. So Mexicans had owed us money. People in Mexico had owed Americans money. Now, I'll remind you, America owed British money. You understand? So, but it wasn't unusual for the people who were owed money to kind of be angry and yell about it loudly. And so they, you know, American people were owed $3 million by people in Mexico. Okay, roughly 3 million. Two, the Mexicans were kind of itching for a fight because they were angry over our support of Texas and ultimately our annexation of Texas. So in other words, they were angry about Texas. They feel like we stole it from them, so to speak, and we helped them escape. The third is this. So let's talk about this now. This guy, John Slidell, goes down to Mexico City. The fella in charge is a general who we've talked about before, Santa Anna. Remember that name? He was a general back in First War, the Texas-American War, Independence War. So we want Mexico to say, what's the boundary of Texas? The Rio Grande. They do not say that that's the boundary. They say the Nueces River is the boundary. So we want to solve that boundary dispute. We'll forgive them the $3 million. See right there? Forgive the debt that, you know, we'll pay off the Americans who are owed money by Mexico. Okay? Make sense? So y'all won't have to pay that. We'd like to buy Mexico's New Mexico territory for $5 million, and we would like to buy California for $20 million. So in essence, it adds up to about $28 million. If you consider 20 million, 5 million, and forgiving 3 million, right? About 28 million roughly. Okay? Well, Mexico won't even talk to Slidell. They refuse to meet him. The government won't negotiate at all. They won't meet him at all. Not halfway or a fourth of the way or make him a counter offer. What's their deal? They're not what? They're not interested. They're not selling. You know, it doesn't matter how much money we owe. You may remember this is a pretty colossal sum of money, right? And so because Slidell is rejected, Polk says, well, gee, that ought to be a casus belli. Because they treated him rude. Because they've got troops stationed near the Rio Grande, that should be a casus belli. What's a casus belli? C-A-S-U-S, second word, B-E-L-L-I.
Cause for war.
That's right, cause for war. That should be a casus belli, a cause for war. But his cabinet are like, I don't know, President Polk, not talking to our diplomat might be a tough sell on going to war, right? So this is where Polk gets the kind of reputation as a warmonger. Like he really, if they're not going to sell it to us, what are we going to do? Keep in mind, is Polk on a fairly short timeline? You know, he said he's going to run once, and so what's the date here? He's halfway through his term. You're in 1846, right? And they're not even talking to our guys. So Polk's feeling a sense of urgency that the Mexicans don't quite recognize. They don't realize this Polk, the purposeful guy, is going to come get it if they don't sell it. Now, I'm not saying Mexico should have sold it, but I am saying since they didn't sell it, what happens? We're going to have a cause for war. Now, none of this, I argue, and by the way, I'm not alone, his own cabinet said, this doesn't really cause for war, is it? We're not attacking our ships or shooting Americans or doing anything like that. So this is where Polk's critics, I think rightfully so, if I'm critical of Polk, this is where I would be critical. He sends the U.S. Army into guess where? The disputed territory. Okay? He's going to send them, this is the disputed territory. You see this? See, here is this line right here, you see it? This is the line that Mexico has sort of accepted as Texas. So the Waichis River. This, on the other side of the stripes, is the Rio Grande. Now, Polk says this striped area is America. Mexico says this striped area is Mexico. Now, Webster-Ashburton Treaty, did we split the difference with Britain and Maine? Oregon Treaty, did we split the difference? Who ain't interested in splitting the difference on Texas? Well, Polk is also not interested. I mean, both, you're right. So what he's going to do is send General Zachary Taylor, that name will come up again since he'll be later President Taylor, all right, down into this striped area, knowing full well that who else is in this striped area? Mexican military. So he's sending the American military into the same location as where the Mexican military is, knowing this. What do you think he wants? You want somebody to get shot at, right? Yeah. So Polk does that, and naturally a shot rings out. In fact, shots fired between the sides. That then leads Polk to ask for a declaration of war on Mexico. He's got the votes, not really a debate at this point. They shot at Americans on American soil, Polk says. And here you have a freshman congressman step up and say, wait a minute, I'd like to introduce a resolution in the House for the President of the United States to show me the spot on a map that's America, where these guys were shot. Show me the spot on American soil where Americans were killed. Who's this freshman congressman? Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln will serve one term as a congressman. Because his good voters of Illinois don't like that he opposes what? The Mexican War. But he believes that it's a war to spread slavery. He believes it's a war that Polk is starting with the intent of having more slave states. Lincoln at that time in history is what we would call a conscience Whig. He was a Whig who was opposed to slavery. All right? This war is going to be very, very unpopular in the northeast part of our country because they will see it as a war for what? Slavery. Now, I hate that I missed a couple of days last week and really missed a valuable lesson or two for you guys. But one of the lessons I missed was the book, an essay by Henry David Thoreau. Now, you guys remember Henry David Thoreau? If y'all didn't read it, see, it's killing me. If y'all don't go back and watch that video and you don't read it, you're going to miss out. So, Transcendentalists. He was one of America's greatest poets. At the time, he had to pay a poll tax to vote. He refused to pay his poll tax and demanded the right to vote. So they arrested him and asked, why are you refusing to pay your poll tax? He said, I will not pay a tax to an unjust war. And so they went to jail. This was the first act, which he wrote an essay on called An Essay on Civil Disobedience. Thoreau's writing would go on to influence men like Gandhi, Martin Luther King. And so there were people, particularly the Transcendentalists. By the way, most Transcendentalists were also abolitionists. You understand? Ralph Waldo Emerson, abolitionists. Okay? So these great philosophers said we're opposed to what? To this war, this unjust war. But guys, over most of the country, it was very popular. Northeast, not so popular. They also saw it as expanding for what kind of states? Well, yes, slave states, but also southern and western states, which meant more votes for who? Southern and western Democrats, particularly, right? So they didn't like it, and they opposed. But most notably, please write down Thoreau and civil disobedience, because if you missed out on who the Transcendentalists were, these great poets, these writers. This is a chance to meet them. So the Transcendentalists were philosophers. Anyway, if we have time at the end of this, I'll review the Transcendentalists since it's on the unit test, okay? And I missed that lesson. But Thoreau himself will go to jail over protest of it. Lincoln protest. So it's not a secret that slavery and slave advocates do want this to see the spread of slavery. The problem is, how do you separate that from what Polk believes in that America should grow? You understand? I mean, yes, Polk was a slave owner from Tennessee, and he represented slave interests. But he was also an advocate for manifest destiny, which means America should grow, right? And so that's how these two things get sort of intertwined, okay? All right, the Slidell is rejected. Now, this is the first time, but it will not be the last time, during this debate about the Mexican War, that someone says, well, wait a minute, we can make this easy. We could just say no territory gained can have what in it? Slaves. We'll just, before the war ends, prohibit slavery in the outcome of it. Okay? So he was a congressman from Pennsylvania, David Wilmot, and he said in any territory gained from the Mexican War, no slavery. So it's called a Wilmot Proviso. It means no, Wilmot Proviso. Okay? And under the Wilmot Proviso, number 40 down here, under the Wilmot Proviso, there would be no spread of slavery in any territory. It passed the House, but was voted down in the Senate. I think it was voted down in the Senate. Yeah. The slave state ballots stopped it from getting passed. More, he was a Democrat, but he was a Northern Democrat who was not a fan of slavery. You understand? More anti-slavery spread in northern states, so that passes the House, but it fails to pass the Senate. But it should send you a signal. If you were paying close attention, back in 1816, there was an attempt to stop any slavery in the Louisiana Purchase, and it failed in the Senate. It was called the Talmadge Amendment. How did the Talmadge Amendment get resolved? How did they resolve the question of it?
Missouri Compromise.
Very good. The Missouri Compromise, right? Well, if the Wilmot Proviso is not going to become the law, then they're going to need something else. And that's going to become one of the most important laws in American history, called the Compromise of 1850. All right, so LOCOM, 1820, Compromise 1850. Both compromises are a result of America gaining territories. You understand? Whenever we gain territory, question mark. The slave or not the slave, right? Okay, so let's get to the war itself. So when the war breaks out, you had an enterprising soldier who was already in California. Keep in mind, the Mexicans did not have a large population in California. This is like way away. This is like our frontier, okay? And so he had actually created a unit. And as soon as the war breaks out, as soon as Congress declares war, he declares California's independence. So his name, John C. Fremont, and he declares the California Republic. So in other words, they immediately declare their independence, just like Texas had, right? And they're going to fight a little bit, but not much, because the Mexicans there didn't even know that there was like a thing going on. See what I'm saying? Like, what? So the Bear Flag Republic, it lasts as a country for about a minute, all right? So they're in California. So you're going to have four heroes that are generals or captains or majors emerge. First one to know who? John C. Fremont. So he leads California's independence, so to speak. Okay? But our next general, who is the general who really is going to run much of the upward campaign in Mexico, is Zachary Taylor. And he's known by his own men as Old Rough and Ready. He doesn't wear a nice uniform. He dresses with a straw hat. In fact, there's a story about a major who was on the way to the camp. As he was headed down the road, he saw a farmer walking in a field. He looked over to the farmer and he said, "Hey, which way to General Taylor's camp?" And the farmer pointed it down the road. A couple hours later, the major was brought in to see the general, and turned out it was the farmer walking in the field. Zachary Taylor was just out taking a walk, but he looked like a farmer, even though he was the commanding general of the army. So Old Rough and Ready, know his nickname. And he is going to do very well in the war. He is going to win a crucial battle here called the Battle of Buena Vista. On the heroic, this is where in the Marine Corps hymn, they say from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. All right, so it's Mexico. So in northern Mexico, here he comes down right here. All right, so he's coming down right here. Okay, and so he's going to be successful in this part. But the problem is, if you've ever been to Mexico, it's a long ways from Texas to Mexico City. Mexico City's like way down, comparable. So he's doing well. Taylor is in this part. I'm going to give you a third general just briefly. A guy named General Kearney is going across here to Southern California. Stephen Kearney, I don't know if I have the name on it. Yeah, I don't. Kearny. So you've got Stephen Kearney takes the kind of like the overland route through Arizona, New Mexico, and seizes Southern California. Fremont seizes Northern California, like what would be Sacramento and that area. Zachary Taylor gains control over the territory around Mexico and Texas border, that Nueces River area. But none of that is actually going to defeat Mexico. If you want to defeat Mexico, where do you have to get to? Got to get to Mexico City. And to do that, you need a naval assault. You need a navy to come down here, land, and then march troops inland. And they had one strong harbor called Veracruz. But we shell Veracruz, all right? And then that's when the hero of the war emerges, and he marches a huge army into Mexico City. His name, he's a commanding general. He is old fuss and feathers. You can tell by the picture, right? He's got like a Napoleon hat on and all that stuff. Old fuss and feathers marches into Mexico City, seizes their capital. At this point, now you're starting to get the idea. Could we just be like, okay, we take over Mexico? Yeah, we could. Holt's getting word of this, and he's like, oh, that's awesome. But he's angry at his diplomat who's down there for not getting them to pass a treaty or give up. And he fires him. But the guy doesn't quit. He doesn't leave. And so he gives a treaty. This guy's name is Nicholas Trist. He does get a treaty negotiated even after he's been neutral slow, right? So he is going to meet with the Mexicans, again, Santa Anna, and they are going to sign a treaty. Now keep in mind, the American military is in Mexico City, so Santa Anna's going to be like, well, this is kind of under duress, but you know, what are you going to do, right? And the treaty is pretty breathtaking, okay? Because it gives us exactly what we wanted. We get all of Texas. Got that? We get all of the territory that you now recognize as United States, right? So that would include the states of New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and California. So if you're thinking about it, plus we already had Texas. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states right there. We gained 6 states out of this. Most importantly, of course, California. Right? The other 2 will be divided into 2 territories. Okay? Initially. So definitely know that. But this is where I love our treaty, right? So we were offering them about 28 million before the war. Okay? 25 million for sure, 3 million paid off debt. At the end of the war, we gave them a check for about 18 million. So had we beaten them,
We saved $10 million.
do what?
We saved $10 million.
Well, we did save. I mean, the war itself was really expensive. We saved it, you know. But nonetheless, from the purchasing price, we saved it, right? So yeah, we took it and then we paid for it. So this is kind of like a thing America does. Like with Florida and the purchase treaty, we're like, we're going to take it or. So they're like, all right, we'll pay you for it. So obviously, this is the type of stuff that, you know, if Germany was doing this, we would be highly critical of it, right? Taking over like Poland or something. But, you know, this is part of our history. And it was part of the conviction that this land was being underutilized by who? Like, who wasn't actually doing anything here? The Mexicans. It was like empty land. It had Mormons, a bunch of Americans in California, and then a bunch of Native Americans. Like the Mexicans weren't there. What was the argument? I think had they been, keep in mind, we do not take over Mexico City. We do not take over the rest of Mexico. We just take the part what? Well, we take the part that we wanted to buy to begin with, right? And yeah, not be a used part. That's right. So I don't say that to justify aggressive land acquisition in history. You know, definitely, like I said, if Hitler were doing this to Czechoslovakia or Poland, we'd be like, oh, that's terrible. But you know, we're America, we're better. All right, you know, and so I guess the key is when you think about it, I guess a country without any honor would not have won at all. Paying for it, right? Like the war debt payment. It's interesting. So the problem is that it's going to, in the short term, create more problems than it's worth. Now, in the long term, it's awesome. I mean, if you consider California awesome, if you consider Nevada awesome. But this is what we get. Okay? Take a look at that. Now, there will be something that we'll pursue in a later chapter, the next chapter. We made a couple of goofs when we signed this treaty, or got this treaty. One, we should have taken this line, this right here. Should have taken what's called Baja, California. That's really useful territory. That'd been awesome. Put Navy ships there, or heck, that's some great vacation stuff, right? We didn't take Baja, so it kind of closed. See how it's landlocked, the southern tip down there at the bottom. And then when we go to build a transcontinental railroad, a fella named Jefferson Davis wants to run it from Louisiana to Southern California. The problem is it's all mountainous. But this little strip right here below the Gila River is not mountainous, which would be an ideal place to run the what? The railroad. So we're going to come back 3 years later, or 5 years later, excuse me, and buy that for a considerable amount of money. The Mexicans will sell us this. So nonetheless, with the exception of where, and where is America full now? This is the lower 48, right? This now concludes the lower 48. Only Alaska and Hawaii are left as part of the 50 states, isn't it? So this will be, you know, a major acquisition. So let's look at the outcomes of the Mexican War. And this is a big one, and it should take you a few minutes. Make sure you know these. In many ways, this war is more important because what it does, outcome, than the events, the battles of it. So I told you it costs a lot of money, right? $100 million. That's a whole lot more money than what we bought for, right? 13,000 dead Americans. Again, most of which die from tropical diseases. That's going to claim more Americans are going to die from bacteria than bullets in the Civil War. Okay? So not at all unusual. Not very good medical, supplies and things like that. Not good treatment. By far, I think the big star in the short term is the huge issue that it brings the issue of slavery back to the forefront. Every time slavery sort of starts to die down a little bit as the dominant debate, something happens to expand it dramatically. Keep in mind, Texas alone will become a massive slave state. But now the question becomes, will California be a slave state? Will Arizona or Nevada, Colorado be slave states, right? This will definitely, depending on whether or not they're free or slave, upset that very, very tenuous balance between northern and southern states. Okay? Both General Scott and General Taylor will run for president. General Taylor will get elected president. So, Whig president, General Taylor. One of the worst aspects of this is when I teach the Civil War, I go back and point out how many of these Civil War generals had practice in the Mexican War. Stonewall Jackson will master the use of artillery during the Mexican War. You understand? Artillery placement. This is like the vanguard, the cutting edge of that. Lee will understand divide and conquer. So many of the soldiers that will lead the Civil War, particularly Confederate soldiers, generals, will be colleagues and allies in the Mexican War. And of course, if you're Mexico, how can you trust the United States? You got your big brother next door. He's a big bully, right? To our country. So big war in terms of outcome, not a big war in terms of casualties, comparable to other wars. Not a big war in terms of duration. really brief war. You understand? But enormous war in terms of legacy. When you look at the map of the United States, you think about the Southwest, that's the Mexican, by the way, we call this land the Mexican Cession, Cession. So if we said, that the Wilmot Proviso was going to prevent slaves in the Mexican Cession, that means the territory taken from Mexico. Got it? Okay. All right. Long-term results. I'm going to stop with this now and see if there are any particular questions on chapter 17. And then I will take you back into the Transcendentalists because I feel like that's something we have to know. You guys had time to copy these 6? That's okay if you haven't. Just finished? Okay. All righty.